Although it's all the way in February, can we go ahead and acknowledge that Kentucky versus Gonzaga may be the biggest non-conference game of the year?
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what is going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on in to Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, writer for Sports Illustrated for various SEC-related things. But on this podcast, we take a dive into all things Kentucky athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing Kentucky versus Gonzaga alongside 4 other non-conference games. I'm going to give you the 5 most important games on Kentucky's non-conference slate. Also, on today's episode, we are going to be getting into listener questions. Got 2 here for you today, and I'm going to ask you here at the top of the episode if you've got any thoughts on anything going on with Kentucky football or basketball. Ask me a question, and I'll answer it here on the show. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everybody out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the show. If you're listening on podcasts, follow along there as well. Let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky versus Gonzaga, I think, may be the most important non-conference game of this year's basketball season, and I think it's definitely the most important one for the Kentucky Wildcats. There are a couple of different reasons why I believe this. Obviously, we can point out the fact that these 2 teams, is Gonzaga a blue blood? I guess we can call them a recent blue blood. The Wildcats as blue as blood can get here. This should be an all-time matchup, and the fact that Kentucky's getting it at home, I think is even more significant. We'll dive into the details here in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to take a look at the 5 most important non-conference games for the Wildcats this upcoming season, because there are some other matchups here on the slate that I really do want to discuss that I'm very excited about. I wrote about this over at wildcatstoday.com, over at Sports Illustrated, if you want to go check that out. Again, wildcatstoday.com. It's a tough non-conference schedule. I don't think that I've emphasized that enough as we've kind of previewed what this early season slate could look like for UK. This very young, inexperienced UK team overall. I know Antonio Reeves, you've got Trey Mitchell as well in here, 2 guys that are very experienced, but as a whole, it's a very young group, and all of these 5-star freshmen are going to have to learn very quickly how to bond and how to have some chemistry against a legitimate college opponent. Obviously, they got to play in the Global Jam. We've shared our thoughts on the legitimacy of that compared to 2 seasons ago, where you had the Bahamas and all that good stuff. But with UK this year, with their young roster, they have some really difficult tests here in this non-con slate. And there are a couple of different games that I have circled that I did not include in this 5. I think the game against Penn is going to be a really interesting matchup. I think that the game against Marshall, UNC Wilmington are the 3 that I'm looking at. Penn, UNC Wilmington, and Marshall. Those are the 3 games that I'm really looking at outside of these 5 here that I'm just like, I want to keep an eye on them, because I think that while UK should be favored in those games, there are some things that the Wildcats are going to have to overcome. Part of that being inexperience, and part of that being just some really good sound coaching or some really good offense on the other end of the floor. We got to see how Kentucky played defensively during the Global Jam. Want to see that improve. Can only think it's going to improve with Ugonna and Yenzo back on the floor. I'm going to talk about him later on in the show. But let's go ahead and get to the first game here in the non-con slate that I think is one of the 5 most important. And I kind of ranked these. If you want to rank them differently in your mind, if you have a different group of teams in here, you can leave it in the YouTube comments below. Louisville, the game against Louisville, a series that Kentucky has, dominated as of late. They've really kind of put their stamp on this rivalry, both in football and basketball recently. And last year was just another game here in the saga where Kentucky beats up on a lesser Louisville team and last year's team, 4-28 for the Cardinals. Just really, really bad. Nothing else to say about it. Why, therefore, is it on my top 5? Well, for a couple of reasons. This matchup on December 21st, by the way, in Louisville. I think that this Louisville team is going to be better than it was a year ago. Now, how much better, I can't sit here and tell you that. I've not been following Louisville closely, but I can sit here and tell you that they're probably going to be improved compared to where they were a season ago. I believe L. Ellis is back for them, which is huge considering he was essentially their entire team a season ago. And the fact that this is in Louisville, Kentucky is probably going to be a bit of a difficult thing for Kentucky's, again, inexperienced young team to overcome. And it's going to be the first, I think, true hostile road environment that these guys really have to involve themselves with, because this is the second to last game of the non-con slate before you head into the SEC play. Obviously, Gonzaga, February 10th. We're going to get to that. But this is the first true road game that Kentucky has to play and really feel maybe uncomfortable because of the atmosphere. I hope that Louisville fans bring it because goodness knows their basketball team needs it right now. But this one, I think, because of the rivalry, because of the fact that it's in Louisville, because of the fact that the Cardinals are going to be better, I think that this is deserving of one of the 5 most important games on Kentucky's slate. They can't drop this one. They cannot drop this one. As far as resume boosting goes, not a whole lot probably to be seen here. I know that it's kind of foolish to be talking about quad 1 through 4 so early in the year because a lot of things fluctuate, a lot of things change. But I don't really see this amounting to anything as far as a resume a resume-defining win for the Wildcats. And hey, if Louisville wins, you know what? Maybe it's a quad 1 win for them whenever they go 13-18 on the season. Kidding. The second most important game, or I would say, I guess the fourth here most important game of Kentucky's non-conference slate is Miami in the ACC SEC Challenge. Some of you may have this one higher on the list. I have them here at number 4 for a couple of reasons. Why does this game matter? Well, Miami lost 2 of its top scores from a season ago when they went to the Final Four. That was a very good basketball team that they put together. Nigel Pack, I believe, is the leading returning scorer in this year's squad. They return scores 3 through 6 from last year's squad. They also brought in a very coveted transfer portal piece, and Matthew Cleveland averaged over 13 a game at Florida State. He is going to be a very important player for them at power forward, I believe. Kind of a wing type, maybe at the 3-2 as well, if you want to put him there. Miami's going to be good. That's kind of what I wanted to say here. Why does it matter? Miami's going to be a good basketball team. They lost their two best players from last year, and they're still going to be pretty dang good. 3 of their 5 projected starters are almost 14-point per game scores. They're going to have kids that can score the basketball. They're going to be able to get downhill. Their 3-point shooting may not be the best in the world. I really like their shooting guard. That was a sophomore last year that's going to step into a starting role this year. But this could be, you talk about resume boosting, this could be a huge win for Kentucky down the line if they're able to secure this one at home. I like having the ACC SEC Challenge here kind of in the middle of where it is on the schedule. I'm not a big fan of it being, this early in the year because people aren't going to care about the matchups as much, which is why we're going to talk about Gonzaga in a minute. But Miami, with what they return, with what they are, I think they've been a pretty consistent program as of late. With what they accomplished last year, to be able to get this one early in the season and for eyes to be on it, I think it's going to be important for UK. And then, like I said, this could end up being like hey, you just beat what ends up being the second best team in the ACC. That could happen. Very, very much so could happen for the Wildcats here. And if they lose this game, there's going to be a lot of different things to take away from it. And we're going to get to a game here in a second where I kind of hit this refrain where if you lose to a team like Miami in your non-con, I think it's very important to identify how you lost the game instead of, oh my gosh, you lost the game. Whatever. It's a game in December, right? How much are people supposed to care or value games in December? I think that's a conversation that we've had a lot here on the show. I think obviously as the season draws on, those games can potentially become more or less valuable. But teams look completely different. a couple months into the season as opposed to just a couple of weeks. With Miami here, do they beat you because they are simply a better team and they continue to develop and they prove themselves to just be one of the best in the ACC? Or do they beat you because of some inexperience, maybe some late game issues that Kentucky can work on? Is this a loss where Kentucky comes out of it and says, yeah, we just don't have the roster to compete with a team like Miami? Or is it we have the roster, we just don't have the preparation yet, and if we're given a second opportunity, we're going to win the game? I think that's very important. We'll discuss that in just a minute with another team. Let's see. We got 3 more teams here on the slate of the 5 most important non-con games of the 2023-24 season for Kentucky. Before we move along to number 3, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Athletic Brewing. It's time for the Game Changer of the Week, brought to you by Athletic Brewing Company. Much like players like Kentucky's DJ Wagner, Athletic Brewing has completely changed the non-alcoholic beer game. They make non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good. As we all know, Kentucky's point guard spot has kind of suffered over the past couple of seasons. Not to say Severe Wheeler was not a phenomenal assist man, but the height, the lack of consistent defense, and I think the efficient scoring is something that Kentucky severely desired in moments where they lost games where they really could have used it. And DJ Wagner, I think, brings you that in spades. I think he brings a calming presence to the backcourt. He brings you good scoring. I think an excellent three-point shot as well. He is completely going to change the dynamic in the game for Kentucky's offense this season. Athletic Brewing makes non-alcoholic beers that are, like I said, actually taste good. They're full of flavor and well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. They also brew over 50 styles of craft non-alcoholic beer, including IPAs, Goldens, Sours, and more. And they're the fastest-growing non-alcoholic brewery in the U.S., so you need to get on board. You can find the Athletic Brewing Co.'s non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or buy online at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. I really appreciate you guys making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Guys, we are going to talk about football for 2 different episodes this week. I am going to be bringing on Andrew Stefaniak, writer at Wildcats Today, alongside myself on Wednesday to preview a lot of different things going on in the UK sphere, but also I want to talk about this game against Ball State this Saturday. I am so excited that college football is finally back. If you didn't watch any game in week 0, I mean, I don't fault you for it, but I am a little bit disappointed that you have not chosen to indulge in the awful slate that was week 0. But man, I'm so excited for Kentucky football. I'm so excited for the season opener. These first few weeks of the season should be really interesting to see how Kentucky pans out offensively. Ben Christman, by the way, transfer from Ohio State, out for the season at offensive tackle. That's a huge blow heading into this year. But these 3 first games, I think, will give Kentucky time to figure some things out. So if you like Kentucky football, this is going to be the place for you this fall, promise you. I know we've not talked about it a ton recently, but I promise you we will be discussing it quite a bit here as the season gets underway. Also, just want to mention briefly, if you've not checked out the Locked On College Basketball Podcast with Andy Patton and Isaac Shade, they talk a lot about Kentucky over there as well. You need to check them out on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. They are excellent at what they do, and I truly do mean that. So we've got 3 more games here on the non-con slate, or at least the 5 that I've chosen here that are the most important of the non-conference slate. And the third game I have here is the game against North Carolina in Atlanta, the CBS Sports Classic. UNC leads this series all-time 25-17. Kentucky's kind of split it pretty even / taken a lead over here in the past, I would say, decade plus. The 2000s have really been a good time for the Wildcats ever since the turn of the century, I should say. Why does this game matter, though, for this year? Well, Kentucky hasn't played North Carolina since 2021. In the past half decade, they've missed a few years. I believe 3 out of the last 5, Kentucky and North Carolina have not played. Part of that was due to COVID. But, I mean, you have to give these 2 blue bloods a chance to play each other, I think, every single year. I think that they should make it, these schedule makers for both these respective schools should make it a priority that both of these teams play every single season. They are two phenomenal programs. I think that UNC is going to be a better basketball team than they were last year. They're going to be above bubble watch. I really like their freshman point guard that they have in Elliot Cadeau. I believe that's his name. Or Armando Bacot's back. He's a great piece that they have in their front court. This is going to be a good team. I think it's going to be a fun team for UNC. And this should be a very fun game in Atlanta. It's going to be in the evening. It's going to be nice and cool. It's going to be a great environment. I'm most likely going to be there. I'm going to be shooting some video for you guys and maybe getting some podcast up from the ATL. But I think that this one should be fun. And on top of it being a potential resume booster, I think that there's no reason why you shouldn't have this one in your top 5. Even if UNC's not that good, you've gotta love the environment here heading into this one. With the Wildcats taking on the Tar Heels, these teams should play every single year. I'm glad that they're playing this year. Fun is the word that I would use to describe this matchup. The second most important game of the non-conference slate. I think it's pretty clear. You probably have guessed it. It's Kansas. It's the third game of the season, if I'm not mistaken, against the Kansas Jayhawks. Boys, this one's going to be tough. And like I said a minute ago, there's going to be one big takeaway that we have from this being so early in the season. I don't think that there's a whole lot that you can truly take away from a win or a loss. But I think the biggest thing I'm going to be asking myself here is if Kentucky won or if they lost, how did that exactly happen? Because last year, whenever these two teams played in Rupp, Kentucky lost that game, and they could have won that game. I sat here on this podcast, and I told you Kentucky could have won that game. But I also told you that Kansas just looked like the better team. They had the better roster. They had the better matchups, and I think they had the better coaching at the moment. And Calipari did a lot of different things to try and fix last year's roster. He can't really get it done against a really good team like Kansas. At least he couldn't then. So if Kentucky wins this game, do they win it because they have the better roster? Is it evident that Kentucky has the matchups and the scoring and the guard play to take Kansas out? Or is it like, well, they kind of got lucky in some areas. Kansas didn't shoot that well, even though they probably should have shot a little bit better. Kentucky's defense still doesn't look as strong as it could be. They were a little bit loose at times. That's a concern. And if Kentucky loses, it's like, okay, well, they just got dominated in the paint. Like, Kentucky didn't have any good rim protection all evening. Ugonna and Yenzo still not healthy, and so we don't really know what that's truly going to look like. And, Kansas still has a lot of experience and a lot of depth at the guard spots and at the wing that really just ends up killing Kentucky in the end. And it's just one of those where it's just like, okay, Kentucky, didn't shoot well, and they lost the game because they just simply aren't a better team. How does this one look? It's going to be very, very important to me, even though it's so early in the season. I think that's about the only thing you can take away. It's not going to be like, oh, well, Antonio Reeves went for 27, so therefore he's going to be a 20-plus point per game scorer every single game this season. Oh, Kentucky out-rebounded Kansas. Oh, they're going to be a good rebounding team. I don't think that you can take broad strokes takeaways, but this will be an opportunity for us as fans to kind of get an idea of what UK could be as the season continues to develop. Kansas State in the State Farm Champions Classic. And I think that the final note I want to make here, and I wrote this as well, Kentucky needs this one, I think, to prove early that they are back on track. And what I mean by that is that last year was kind of a fluke with a roster that just was really injured in a lot of different areas and just did not gel as well as some Kentucky teams of the past did, and that this younger team is going to prove that the Wildcats are still the Wildcats. The final game I want to get to here, it's the biggest one, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show. Gonzaga. The Wildcats have only played the Bulldogs twice. Series is tied 1-1, obviously. Gonzaga won last year. Why this one matters? There's a lot of different reasons why this one matters. First of all, revenge. Like the Kansas game, you're going to want some revenge in this one after getting just splattered on the road in Washington last year. This contest being played in February instead of late November, early December, I think is huge. We could just sit here and just forget about the SEC Big 12 Challenge later on in the slate. Let's just have a pair of potentially top 15 teams from different conferences square off against each other every single year. Let's do that. Let's forget about the challenges, and let's just go and pick one of the best teams in the nation every year, and let's just plop them right down in the middle of the SEC slate. We've talked about this one already here on the show, about how what surrounds it is important. And then how Kentucky comes out of this one, I think, is also the thing you're going to want to watch here. How do they respond, win or loss, continuing back into the SEC slate? Because what Gonzaga is going to probably be, I'll say, dramatically different than what anything Kentucky sees in the SEC this upcoming year. Offensively, I think that they are going to be very difficult to handle. This one's going to be rough. Just like Kansas, it's going to be a tough out. Does Kentucky have the horses to score to keep up with Gonzaga? This one being at home, I think, kind of helps that. But with this being in February, whether they keep up or not, it's going to be a great, and I mean great, indicator of what Kentucky could be in March. Because if you're able to kind of control, and I'm not saying it's going to happen, I'm not predicting Kentucky to blow Gonzaga out. If you're able to control the Bulldogs in certain ways, slow down their offense, maybe dictate the pace a little bit, shut down some of their scores, or at least hold them to inefficient night, it's really going to help mentally, I think, for this team and for the fan base as well, to know that, hey, Kentucky's got the dudes to make a run in March here. They've got the players. Thank goodness. I'm so excited. It will bring excitement if Kentucky's able to actually prove, hey, we've got the makeup of a Final Four team. I think that you could see that in this game. You could also see in this game where it's like, hey, Kentucky's probably not going to make it past the round of 16 if they continue to do what they're doing on defense right now. That could also be the situation here. Gonzaga is a huge non-conference game. Watch how they win or lose this one. The Wildcats do. Watch how the Wildcats play in this game. All right, that's all I have to say about Kentucky's 5 most important non-conference games of the 2023-24 season. If you have any thoughts on the slate, if you want to give your top 5 in the comments below, you can do so, or hit me on the socials at LockedOnUK on Twitter. All right, before we get to 2 listener questions to wrap up the show, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. I know we were talking just a little bit ago about Kentucky versus Ball State, and getting close to the game. It's game week. It's Monday. Some of you are going to be listening to this on Tuesday, some on Wednesday. I would advise you guys, if you're looking for some last-minute tickets, don't be stressed about it. Head over to Game Time and get them really conveniently. It's fast and easy to buy all tickets for all different sports you want, not just football, not just college football, but if you're an NFL fan, if you want to go up to get a Bengals game here at some point in the future, if you want to go watch a Reds game, music, comedy, theater as well, on top of not just sports. They've also got killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You have to stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for all of the fun that you will have. You can browse through the Game Time app and talk about upcoming events in your area. I'm actually going to cut this and edit it because I just